This week in the Regency, we're starting with an apology. I've been having trouble. Now I have a green screen behind me, so I can look like I'm in the Regency. And apparently the software thinks that my eyes are the same color as the green screen, which is why I've had this flickering thing happening with the devil eyes. So I've turned the green screen off for today and tamped down my hair as much as I can. I have ordered a blue screen. So hopefully that will fix it. My eyes aren't even that green. This week in the Regency, we're looking at male versus stagecoach. So if you were, for example, a young woman unfairly banished to a Queen Square school in Bath, and you wanted to get back to Oxford or London, I haven't decided which, to make sure that your brother is all right, would you take the mail or would you take the stage? And yes, it might have something to do with the story I'm writing, but so I went looking for third week of October Bath coaches. And this was absolutely the easiest bit of research I have done so far in this series, because there were so many coaches going to so many different places so often. And Bath isn't that big, but also it allowed me to look at the list of coaches and where they went, and they went everywhere. So before we look at the difference between a male and a stagecoach, let's look at one of the advertisements. I love the image on top of that. And please note that this is a stagecoach at the top. We know it's a stagecoach because there are two people sitting at the back. And on a male coach, there was only one, and I'll explain why in a minute. So, cheap, safe and expeditious travelling to London from the Greyhound, Marketplace, Bath. Now that's the Greyhound Inn. The Royal Blue, and that's a line, it's a brand. The Royal Blue light single-bodied coach sets out every afternoon at 4 o'clock and arrives early the next morning at the White Horse Cellar, Piccadilly, and Saracen's Head, Snow Hill. So other advertisements claim 14 hours journey from Bath to London. Also coaches to Bristol every morning at 9 o'clock and afternoon at 7 o'clock. Bristol is the biggest town closest to Bath. To the Talbot, Bath Street, Swan, Maryport Street and Bush Tavern, and returns from thence every afternoon at 1 and 4. So if you were living in Bath but you had business in Bristol, it's relatively easy to get there. So these are stagecoach advertisements. I couldn't find any male coaches going to London. I suspect the male coach came from Bristol to Bath. Like it would have gone to Bristol and then there would have been another coach going from Bristol to Bath. But I could not find any male coaches going from London to Bath. Doesn't mean there weren't any, just that I couldn't find them. So if I were a young lady going to London, I might want to go to the Greyhound Inn and get one there. Or I could go elsewhere. The 4 inside coach to London every afternoon at 4:15. Now, a lot of the ads had this 4 inside coach thing. And what that was about was that coaches comfortably only sat 4 people. That's why sociables were sociable, because you could have 3. The benches were wider and you could sit 3 comfortably, so 6 people rather than 4. If you don't know what a sociable is, you can go back and watch that video. But a 4 inside coach promises the passenger that there will only be 4 people. and that you will, in fact, have enough room. The 4 inside coach to London every afternoon at 4:15, or a 4 inside coach to London in 2 days. Sleep at Newbury at 8 o'clock every morning except Sunday. So why would you go in 2 days rather than overnight? Well, you might not be a good traveller. These were not very comfortable coaches. Well, coaches, generally speaking, weren't comfortable. Even a post-chaise wasn't great. And the roads were much better between London and Bath than they had been the previous century, but they still weren't great. I mean, we're still talking about a dirt track. So some people just couldn't take 14 hours in a coach. If you had bladder problems, for example, you might well want to have a rest overnight. And maybe you had business at Newbury, who knows? So if you were a young lady running away from Bath, you would have to take a stagecoach rather than a mail coach, and that means it would take you longer. So what's the difference between the stagecoach and the mail coach? Well, this is a mail coach. I love how mail coaches started. They were started, the idea for them came from a guy called John Palmer, who was he was a theatrical entrepreneur, and he used to take troops of actors all over the country, and he had it set up so he had particular inns where he kept horses, and they could go very quickly, and they could do a night, and then they'd move on, that whole repertory theatre thing. And at that stage, this is in the 1700s, 1760s, 1770s, the mail was taken by a single rider, a pony express, basically. And those people were often attacked, and the horses were stolen, the mail was stolen, etc. But it was fairly quick, but not that quick. And so Palmer went to Pitt, who was the Prime Minister, and suggested that they use his system. And Pitt gave it a trial, and it was so successful that pretty soon the mail coach system spread right across Britain, and certainly by the Regency. The difference between the mail and the stage was how fast it was. And it was faster not only because they had dedicated horses waiting for them at every stage. A stage, if you remember, is anywhere between 5 and 15 miles. 20 miles was a very long stage. And there's a coaching inn, and there are horses that are owned by the post office. Nobody else can use them, and so there's always horses waiting for them. And they didn't stop for meals. So if you went on the mail, you had to take your own food and drink, not too much drink because they wouldn't stop to let you have a pee. And occasionally, when they stopped and the ostlers were changing the horses, the innkeepers would come out and bring food. But you couldn't rely on that, so you had to take your own. And you had no breaks. So when you got to the inn, if you rushed out, you could get to the toilet. A bit harder for women than men, because they would have to go inside, whereas men, there was usually a barrel outside around the back. So it was quite uncomfortable and very fast. The drivers were the kind of drag racers of their time. They were very competitive about how long it took them to get from one place to another. They really treated the horses terribly. It was a very short life to be a mail coach horse because they wanted both speed and a big load dragged behind them. 4 horses always. As you can see here, they're often very loaded up. The stagecoach went slower. It was supposed to have horses allocated to it, but if a duke came in and wanted those horses, they'd probably go, and you'd have to wait for the new horses to come back. But generally speaking, they stopped more often. They stopped for meals, they stopped for comfort breaks, and they didn't try to go as fast. So their horses were in slightly better nick, although they had to carry bigger loads. And the reason they had to carry bigger loads goes back to why I know that stagecoach in the ad was a stagecoach, not a mail coach, is that the mail coach had a guard up the back. That's in the red. And he was standing on the mail. So that box below him is where the mail was kept, and he was armed, and no one was allowed to ride with the guard. So although the mail did sell both inside and outside tickets where you could sit up the top with the luggage, no one was allowed to ride with the guard. That was a absolutely 100% rule. But what if you were not the young lady running away from school, but another young lady, perhaps who had been trained to be a governess, who was going down to Bath to take up a position as a teacher in a Queen's Square boarding school? What would you do? Would you take the mail coach, or would you take the stagecoach? Well, you would have a choice between a normal stagecoach and what's called a flying post coach. And a post coach is one that has postilions rather than drivers. And we don't know whether they went faster, but the implication is that they went faster because they're flying post coaches, touring through Chippenham, Colney and Marlborough every afternoon. Arrive at Mr. May's, the Greyhound Inn, so that's where those other coaches left from, Bath, and the London Tavern, Thomas Street, Bristol, next morning. Right, so there were coaches. It's like buses. They're like buses. They're coming and going all the time. And none of them are comfortable. Some of them are faster than others. The difference, I think, between the mail and the stage for a young lady is that the mail has two guards. It has the guard sitting up next to the driver, the offsider, as he was known. And in America, that person was called the shotgun rider, So when you say shotgun, you're actually claiming the position of being next to the driver in a coach, and that person was typically armed and employed by the company. And then they also had the guard at the back, who was also armed. So the mail coaches were faster, and also you didn't stop, which was uncomfortable. But it meant that a young woman traveling alone didn't have to negotiate inns, didn't have to negotiate strange men in coaching inns. And there were always strange men in coaching inns because they were so busy. So the mail was both faster and safer for a woman, but not very comfortable, and it was more expensive. So you can decide for yourself. Would you have got the mail? Would you have got the stage? Or would you have got the flying post coach? All of these were uncomfortable and slow compared to travel now, or even compared to travel in a post-chaise or a curricle, although it would have been a very long trip in a curricle. So that's this week in the Regency. Hopefully next week I'll have a blue screen. I can let my hair down again. I haven't got quite enough hair to do the proper Regency hairdo, but when I do, which will be soon, we will do a video on Regency hairstyles. I'm Elizabeth Layden. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of This Week in the Regency, and I hope to see you next week in the Regency.